Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
As a little context, I come in generally on Monday mornings and we'll record a podcast, me talking. The interviews can happen anytime during the week or the evenings or the weekends. But generally, I'll get myself prepared to have a conversation just talking here on this podcast on Monday morning. There's free time and it gives me the weekend to kind of prepare. That said, I was all set to go with a particular theme, and I'll hit on that. I won't abandon that. But for today, I was just going to take a little left turn or a right turn or a little detour and cover some other materials. I received an email this morning from Bob Berg. I'm subscribed to his his daily little insights that he has, and I tend to read them all because they're short, bite-sized little concepts. And today was one that really kind of resonated with me. So we're going to talk about it because it has a direct application to networking, if you will. Bob starts out by paraphrasing from Dale Carnegie's classic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and he paraphrases by saying, the biggest mistake we as humans make is believing that we're dealing with people of logic rather than people of emotion. And it's true. People are generally individuals of emotion. They're driven by emotion. There are lots of examples for that. Somebody buys a car, it's more expensive because it feels right or it's safe, and maybe those are logical. But you can kind of make arguments both ways on those sorts of things. Somebody they just like a car, and so they're going to be, it's the bias in their mind where they're going to just find a reason as to why. They might read something online that totally goes against them buying that car, but just their emotion, they'll discount that. Well, yeah, I see that, but I also see these other things, and these other things get more weight. People will choose restaurants based on just the vibe of the restaurant, not necessarily Yelp stars, or Google reviews or whatever you tend to look at. It even comes down to, like in sports. I mean, people argue who's the greatest in basketball, LeBron James or Michael Jordan. And, people just ignore the stats. And I'm not saying one is right or the other, but people will tend to ignore the stats, or they'll put forth the stats that support their position and dismiss the other ones. And so, people are driven by emotion. They're not driven by logic. And so as you're out there dealing with people in your network, you need to recognize that it's not always logical. And that kind of explains why people might do something. We might say, well, that's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. Well, it is perhaps a no-brainer logically, but emotionally, it's not. And so people will choose to do something entirely different, whether they're, you're the best option, but they're not referring you. It's logic is on your side, but emotion isn't, is really what it comes down to. But the interesting thing about Bob's newsletter, that point was good, but the interesting thing, his big twist was, while, Dale Carnegie's insight that we had, the fallacy is that we people feel that others are logical but when they're really emotional. If that's the biggest fallacy, the second mistake is thinking we're the logical ones, thinking that we operate differently, and the reality is that we're still we operate with that same emotional soup, if you will. And I always use home and auto insurance. I know I could get cheaper home and auto insurance, probably with the same coverage. But I stay with my guy. Um, Shout out to Rick Levere, Mark Matthews. I stay with them just because I know I know they're on my side. I know they've got my back. And could somebody else have my back? Sure, they could. But you know what? They're the devil that I know, or the angel that I know. And they've been there for me, and it's not broken, so why change? And so, somebody could say, well, I can get you better coverage, and we can do these other little things, and logically that makes sense, but emotionally um, I'm gonna do this. Or another hypothetical, a lawyer argues with a spouse about vacation, making logical pros and cons, but they still end up at Disney because the kids want Disney. And emotion wins, right? Kids aren't going to buy into the logic of, well, this will be, we can spend more time, blah, blah, blah. It'll be less expensive, but it's Disney. And so we get caught up in these things, but we also need to recognize that we're caught up in these things as well. So we need to operate. Well, I think the way to look at it is we need to really step out of ourselves, if you will. We need to just take the time and just say, you know what? Um, I need to make a habit of stepping out of myself and observing my thoughts and actions. And this is me talking to myself. You have to make your own determination. But after reading Bob's newsletter, it's like, okay, I have some work to do here, right? And I am a work in progress. We're all a work in progress. But I have some work to do here, and that I need to step out of myself with my thoughts and actions and say, okay, I'm, I may not be operating logically here, but is emotionally the best course of action? Is going to Disney World, I know emotions is pulling that, I guess it's hard to reason with the kid, but as a kid, it's like, oh, emotionally, yeah, it's Disney, it's Mickey Mouse, but as a person, okay, emotionally, I'm going with does this make sense? And knowing that somebody is dealing with me and they're totally exasperated because they put the no-brainer in front of me, and I'm saying no to the no-brainer, um, and they're totally perplexed. Well, why? Why would you do that? And so I need to be able to step out of myself and really challenge myself, with respect to, certainly purchasing decisions, who my vendors are, how I operate, how I deal with people, how I respond to people. I need to recognize that, okay, logically, this is the course of action, but emotionally, this is what I'm telling how I'm telling myself to respond. And so I need to be able to step out of myself and really challenge that line of thinking. And maybe there's a middle ground. I don't know. Maybe emotionally it might be ultimately the best way to go, but at least recognize that there's this war going on, if you will, this conflict going on in my own mind. I'm only human. There's the conflict going on between logic and emotion. And if nothing else, I think thinking this through for me, and maybe for you, um, will help me be less emotionally reactive to things. Because people will say things, and I'll be like, oh, you kind of, I'm human. I'm being human. Um, and if I can just step back from myself and say, okay, I understand that I have some emotions here, but let me really think this thing through. Maybe logic is the better play. Maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe there's a compromise here. Maybe what I need to do is I need to stop and I need to look at where they're coming from. If someone feels undervalued, there's no data, there's no amount of there's no amount of logic that will win them back. You just, they just need to feel, value. Excuse me, they need to feel validated, um, and validate their feelings. I understand you're upset about this, and you think about it. Think about it in commercials like Apple commercials. Apple commercials rarely talk about gigabytes. They're always really kind of talking about lifestyle, if you will. Um, so again, when it comes to me, I'll talk about me. This is, I guess, my work, and you can do your own work. Um, you might feel like this, you might erroneously think like this doesn't apply to you, but it does. If you're honest with yourself, you don't need to admit it to me or to anybody else, but you just need to have that quiet conversation with yourself. But ask myself, am I pushing this idea because it's best for the team or because I need to be right? Um, and that can be indicting, right? That can be very indicting. To step forward and a degree of vulnerability, and just to say, okay, I'm wrong in this. I need an opportunity to step back. And now people should give you the opportunity to step back. I'm always a little taken back when somebody's like, they're challenge you and they want a decision, when they know you're perplexed about something. And that's something I need to do in dealing with other people, right? I mean, you're being emotional about this. I would never say that to somebody, but recognizing they're being emotional about it and just putting forth a little bit of logic to them. And here's why I see this as the way to go, even though I know you might think differently, and giving them giving them a chance to just think on it. Just take the time to think on it. And who knows where they go, where they come out. They may still come back at it, but if you're coming at them and giving them an opportunity to think it through, I always find that if I'm forcing somebody, they're going to just dig in deeper. But if I give them an opportunity to just to think about it, just think for a second about this and the bigger picture, that they become more open-minded. I know I'm that way. Somebody who's trying to just push me into their line of thinking, it doesn't work, right? I just become more obstinate, become more angry, I become more tunnel visioned, if you will. Logic steers the ship, right? I get it, but emotion is kind of the wind in the sails. And if you can learn to recognize that, both in others and yourself, right? It's not just another thing, but you'll stop fighting the wind, if you will, and learn to harness it. There's some good in the emotion that we have. There's some good in the things that we want to do. But there's also some good in the logic, and there might be a middle ground there. The story I'll end with is years ago when I was converting what was Network Professionals to AmSpirit Business Connections. There were several hundred people out there that had name badges that said Network Professionals, and it was going to cost me a few $1,000s to upgrade everybody's name badge, and I didn't want to spend the money. I just wrote a huge check to buy this, and I didn't want to spend any more money. And so I was like, yeah, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. But somebody got me on the phone, friend, David Groh, member in the organization, very calmly said, I get it. I get where you're coming from. You've spent a ton of money. You're going to take some losses as a result of the money. Some people are going to leave. You don't want to commit anything else. I get it. It's like buying a house and then realizing, okay, geez, I need to redo the roof. I just bought the house. But he kind of walked me through some logic. He said, and didn't push me at all. Just think about it. And I took the afternoon and I really mulled it over and came to the conclusion, which was the right conclusion. I bought everybody a new name badge. And it was the right decision. Emotionally, I went against my emotion and it was the right decision. I'm not saying that always is the case. What we did is we let the membership settle out a little bit before we did it. And, that minimized, what I had to do. but it just goes to show, it's just an example of how we are always battling with the logic in our brain and the emotion in our brain. So that was a good conversation. This is the first episode released for the new year, at least the original release. It might come out again. We tend to re-release these, but just a great way to start the year, something to grow on for 2026.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.